I'm Kevin Theos. I'm the president of the USPTA Southern Division. Dave Howell is a USPTA member and taught tennis in Southeastern Virginia from 1971 to 2008. He created what became the Universal Tennis Ratings, or UTR system. In 2017, he and his partner sold UTR, and since then he's been developing 7-Shot Tennis, which is a company that teaches and certifies people on how to deconstruct tennis points through a novel charting system. Dave, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Kevin. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today and everybody else.
Dave, we have you on today to primarily talk about how pros can develop a financial niche for themselves using the 7-Shot Tennis match charting system. But before we get to that, and because of the phenomenal success of UTR, could you talk for a moment about your about how UTR tournaments can provide revenue for pros and how maybe it relates to 7-Shot Tennis?
Sure. When UTR started really sometime around late 2005, 2006, and it began as a local program in Southeastern Virginia, and I worked with at least another half dozen pros in the area because we wanted to spread this thing out and not just have it dominated by one club, and we didn't want to have it dominated by the high-end players necessarily. We wanted a complete pathway from the top level former college players who were in the area who would play for a little bit of money and get it all the way down to the kids who were just coming out of let's say a summer program and they just learned to play tennis. And in working with the local pros, one of the things that we shot for was that the pros should be able to make as much money as a minimum for the time they put in running a tournament as they would if they were doing a private lesson. And got a lot of guys to buy into that. It worked very, very well. But the spinoff from that was that the pros would have their own players in the tournaments, and they were able to observe what they were doing. So it really created for them not just the revenue that they were getting from the time and the hours they were putting in the tournament, but they were also creating more opportunities for them with their lessons and their clinics. And so you can really do these tournaments with a relatively small number of courts, a small number of players. It's easy to orchestrate. One of the things I think that made it very simple on us was the scheduling aspect. We could start a tournament at noontime, play a round, and depending upon what level of play, whether it was mini sets or 2 sets and a 10-point tiebreaker, you could get through in 3 hours of play, couple of rounds, and the parents knew when to come, knew when they were going to leave, and if the kids got through the first day, they had to schedule the second day. It wasn't the kind of thing that you go to an age group tournament oftentimes and you're playing at 8:30 in the morning and not again until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So being able to control those kinds of aspects created a better market, in my opinion, and the teaching pros liked it. And so that was the beginning of that. And of course it went on to grow into something that I've always hoped it would grow into. But toward the, somewhere in that process, I began watching more and more of players at different levels, and this whole 7-Shot Tennis thing will evolve from 2 different things. Years before, I had done something which I'll talk about in a minute when I was working with a good junior player here in Virginia Beach. But I began to notice there were some characteristics of the points that, let's say, the level 1 players, their characteristic was once they were able to get the serve in and they'd return the serve and maybe there'd be a couple more shots, it seemed like those rallies were focused on a particular area of the court, and most of the time the ball would bounce just inside the service line, and the kids would end up playing from what we called no man's land back then. Nowadays, you might think of it as a 60-foot area. And so that was kind of interesting to me. Gosh, look at all the number of times the ball's bouncing in this particular area. And then I would look at the next higher level, the twos who hadn't been playing too much longer than the ones, but they gained more confidence. Their strokes were growing a little bit. And now I began to see that more and more shots were landing over the service line. And they were naturally beginning to move a little bit farther back. Their game was growing. It was almost the nature of the way that they were learning. And ultimately, they'd go back a little bit farther until they got back to whole court. And it certainly wasn't that more balls were landing closer to the baseline, but enough balls were landing closer to the baseline than the service line that you could see a change in the nature of things. And so as I looked at that, I said, gee, if ones are hitting here and twos are hitting here and threes are hitting here, and then all of a sudden you're looking at a couple of kids in the finals of the threes, and suddenly a kid hits a shot cross court that looked very deliberate into the corner. Well, maybe she's beginning to evolve into a four because now she's directing the ball and that sort of thing. So as I played all that through, we ended up with, okay, there's 7 shots. And if you think of the 7 shots, a little bit like seven musical notes. There's all kinds of music you can do with 7 musical notes. There's all kinds of things that you can do orchestrating 7 different shots based on areas of the court. So that's kind of how that got started. And my sense is that we formed a little company when a couple of us left UTR because we thought this was a good thing for whether it was teaching pros trying to communicate better with their students or parents trying to understand what it was they were watching on the court. But if a teaching pro or even a high school coach, I think we're very much focused in the area of trying to get into dealing with high school coaches and working with them. But from the teaching pro standpoint, this allows you to, our company allows you to get a manual that takes you through everything you'll need on a certification. We've broken it down into a couple different areas of certification. But from that, just like what Lane was talking about before, you get a certification, you can begin to test the waters in terms of what you want to charge for something. Ultimately, I would hope that you could get to a point where you're charging every bit as much as you might for being on the court for a private lesson. You can also incorporate this with videoing, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But that's essentially, developing something that's a little bit different than what you do in a standard type of thing can create something that may be your particular niche, and it's not particularly hard to do.
So let me ask you this. I mean, we, of course, undoubtedly on the call, we have a number of pros who will travel from time to time, or maybe even on a consistent basis with players to tournaments. And when they do that, they are in the process of going from court to court, watching various players of theirs play. In terms of like the business model, I mean, if I'm traveling with a handful of players to a particular event, it seems like one challenge would be that if I were knowledgeable about seven-shot tennis and certified in, let's say, it would be hard for me to sit down and hone in on one particular player when I've got everybody else out there playing. I mean, how does that work from a business standpoint?
Well, you make a good point. And as far as, first of all, if you're traveling with your junior players, let's say, or even the NTRP players, the fact that you're actually there at a tournament might put you above a lot of other folks who somehow don't find the time to do that. The other issue involved in this is it would be wonderful if you have the capability of being able to video. And of course, that gets a little bit controversial. If you're going to video junior matches, I'm not sure what at one time I used to see at the national tournaments that are in our area and in other areas I've been to, people were putting up GoPro sticks And I thought, well, that's interesting. And then later on, I realized they weren't putting up GoPro sticks anymore. And I checked into that, and they said, well, tournament won't allow you to do it anymore. Yet you see things where, gee, if you're at a place where they've got play site, you can do it. So I spoke recently with some USTA people about, well, how do you go about doing this? I think you just have to get consents to be able to do that. But be able to video, whether you're using a GoPro or you're using a cell phone, if you can simply video from a decent location, a few games of your players, and then move from court to court, and then get back with them after that, that in itself, I think, can be something that is very enlightening and opens up a lot of things. So typically people say, gee, I had no idea what I thought I was doing this, but I see that I wasn't doing that, those kinds of things. So any way that you can incorporate video, whether it's multiple players or just a single player, I think that can really help you build the thing. Following on that, though, I mean, we're all using Zoom today. And I can tell you that a couple of weeks ago, yeah, I knew about Zoom, but now, now that we're all in a situation where we want to communicate with people, we don't, want to be exposed to anything, using something like this with your students where you can control things, even if you're not showing a match of theirs, you can pull up matches off YouTube or those sorts of things and create situations where you're showing them what they should be looking for, and then they can look for it in their own games when you're able to get back on the court.
Okay. How much would you charge to, let's say, I mean, one thing I'm envisioning is there being maybe a couple of layers that, a pro could go out with a particular junior to an event and just have their eyeball, so to speak, on that player and provide feedback to the player and to the parents after having watched the match. And that there is of course, price for that, but that if the parents and player actually want there to be charting in addition, that there would be an additional charge. Is that something that
yeah, well, I think the first thing is I would start with one player. I don't think I try to do more than one player, but I think if you start with one player and you are able to leverage that so that you're getting a good communication, not with the player and with the parents, if they're so interested as to do that. You might do that the first time at half your normal rate, your teaching rate, or maybe even not do it at all. You're just doing it the first time just to show what can be done. And if you can create an interest, then you would want them to invite you back to do it again, and that's when you begin to build on that. The other thing, though, is one of the things I would look forward to is high school teams learning how to do things where the players who are not in the top six can learn some very rudimentary charting skills. And even if you're just looking at, well, did the point end, was it a positive or a negative? In other words, did someone hit a good shot or did somebody hit an unforced error? Good shot meaning they hit a winner or a forcing shot. Just compiling that information and then building on it is very, very useful. From a monetary standpoint, the simpler the better. On the other hand, if you're doing something, say at your club, and you've got two players playing one another and they're about the same UTR level, you've got an opportunity there to then show one player what was going on or show both players at the same time, and then develop things so that, again, you're creating an off-court situation that you can use at a time when you can't get on court.
Okay, so it sounds like, players could actually learn a little bit by getting some rudimentary information, charting methodologies and trying to use those with other players.
Yeah, it's kind of, I think really the ultimate goal here is to get the players to do this. If again, I keep referring to video, and I know that's not always accessible, but just to get a player to scout a match of someone he's going to play against, and to have an organized, systematic way of being able to extract information from the match that you're just watching something and getting an overall view. But if you're not recording something, there's a huge difference between what you see once you've recorded things for a while, written things down, or put it on a tablet or something like that, to just eyeballing a match. And you begin to see tendencies and those kinds of things. But for a player to be able to watch other players and have a system to do this, and then have someone watch, if I were playing a match, I might want to have one of my friends who understood how to do this chart me. But it all begins with the leadership of the teaching pro saying, this is really going to be beneficial for the growth of your game.
All right. Well, fantastic, David. I actually, just a testimonial, I actually charted using your system with my daughter had a high school match, and one of her teammates' parent is a teaching pro. And after that player's match, the teaching pro was talking to the player about what went on. And just from having the stats and having charted the match, I had some additional takeaways for her and her parent. So yeah, it definitely gives you a little, greater insight by charting. So if somebody wants to get started, they go to 7-Shot Tennis. Is that the site?
Yeah, if you're interested, well, there's a couple of things. We do have a website. Thanks for asking that, Kevin. We do have a website, 7shottennis.com, and you can find sort of our philosophy about this there. We have a lot of things there that you can look at. There's some articles we put together.